From the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Justin. Welcome back, everyone.
Hey, Lindsay. So we're continuing our remote recording. Hopefully, sometime in the not-so-distant future, we will be in the same studio together, recording eye-to-eye, face-to-face, closer than 6 feet apart. But until that day happens, we'll continue recording safely from our individual locations.
It's going okay so far. I'm not mad at it.
I feel like we're dialing in the sound thing. I feel like it gets a little smoother with each episode.
It's weird to not be looking at you, to be like vibing off of you, to know where we're going. But otherwise, we talk it out. It's good. It's just so you guys know, we have gone for dog walks, so we have seen each other.
Yeah, we have seen
each other in real life.
Yeah,
in real life.
Yeah. But not as much as I'd like,
No.
But.
And, it's not just the movies that we talk about with the podcast for specific episodes. Like, sometimes we just want to talk about movies.
Yeah.
Anything,
Yeah, feels good.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to do some movie talking today, the kind in which our listeners can hear. And today's movie I'm excited about. We've kind of kicked this one around quite a few times to do, and I'm glad it's finally here, and that's John Singleton's BOYZ N THE HOOD. I know it's been a year now since John Singleton's passed away, R.I.P. And, probably this episode should have come sooner than later, but it is here, and I'm excited to talk about BOYZ N THE HOOD and John Singleton's career a little bit.
John Singleton was somebody that... like when I was watching movies a lot in the 90s, I didn't even know sometimes that I was watching a John Singleton movie. I wasn't paying attention to them like in that way. And I think it wasn't until his third film that I was really like, who is this dude? And then I realized, oh, this is the same guy that did Poetic Justice and BOYZ N THE HOOD, and really became such a fan of John Singleton, and I couldn't be happier that we were talking about this truly wonderful story, everything about this movie. I feel like this movie should be taught in school, like not in college, but probably inappropriate for high school, but man, I feel like it would be beneficial in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's like a very eye-opening movie, and certainly for 1991, it's really aged very well too. I mean, this is a movie that seems still very, very powerful, and very rich. And it's been a great. Yeah, I've watched it, several times in the last week, and it's just such a great story. Great characters, but also at the same time, like, it's a drama, and there are some devastating things that happen in it, but it's also like a very entertaining film, and there is also a lot of humor in it as well.
I had forgotten that upon revisiting it, the amount of humor that is in it, and I don't know how many times I cracked up.
I think this is a movie too that's like, we'll get into it. I feel like we're like talking about the movie. We haven't.
I know we're already talking about it.
Yeah. But yeah, we're gonna get into in depth in BOYZ N THE HOOD. So much to talk about: the cast, John Singleton, the director, how this movie came to be, how it, the reaction that this movie had. There's a lot of pieces came together to get this movie into production and into theaters, and then also how it became, like a very like cultural touchstone.
You just kind of said it all. Yeah.
So much to talk about with BOYZ N THE HOOD. After our discussion there, we're going to get into our picks of the week. Lindsay, you stayed with John Singleton film. Am I right?
Yes, I did. I went with Higher Learning, which was my first introduction to him, actually.
Yeah, I just watched that one the other night. I think we both kind of went on a John Singleton kick. I think I watched his first, 7 movies, or I might have skipped one, but
Certainly, something that is a strong thread throughout all of his films is that they all have so much heart. There's just a lot of man. If people communicated and had the honesty that happens in his movies, it would be a whole different world.
Yeah,
I tell you.
Well, my pick of the week, I went with Deep Cover. My connection being there's actually a few people from BOYZ N THE HOOD in Deep Cover, but it's also, I think, what most people would consider to be Laurence Fishburne's first lead role, where he's like, the top billed actor for the movie. Man, I hadn't seen this one in a while, and I'm real excited to talk about it. It was really, it was a great one to revisit.
Yeah, I know nothing about this one, and I can't wait to hear about it.
Well, as always, we'll round out things with our Murray moments. But before we get into our first clip from BOYZ N THE HOOD, Lindsay, can you give us just a brief summary on what this movie's about?
Of course, I would love to. So it's set in South Central Los Angeles. This is a coming-of-age story about a boy sent to live with his father during the most formative years of his life. And though the pull to get involved in a world of gangs and drugs is all around him, his father guides him into making better decisions for himself, more enlightened decisions. But not having the same kind of support in the lives of his closest friends, we see how that can lead down more devastating paths. This movie has a ton of heart, like I said, every John Singleton movie does, but I really feel that there's something so special about this one, and I think there's a lot of things that can be said about BOYZ N THE HOOD, and we will get into that. But one thing, I think overall, it just gives a better understanding to a world that a lot of people knew and a voice that wasn't being shown in the cinema, and it gives a better understanding of Black culture in South Central Los Angeles.
Thanks for that. No, it's I think that really kind of sums it up real nicely.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, let's go into our first clip from BOYZ N THE HOOD, then we'll be back. We'll talk about it.
Hey, man, what's wrong with you? Fuck you looking at, nigga? I'm still trying to find out, nigga. Hold on. Oh, we got a problem here? We got a problem here? We got a problem, nigga?
Oh, what up with this?
Gun away, nigga.
Can we have one night where there ain't no fight, nobody gets shot?
Shut up, bitch.
Bitch, I will fuck
You
you
call
up.
a bitch. Fuck that motherfucker. Let's get that bitch ass. Why do you like that? Bitch, fuck you. Let's roll, punk motherfucker.
Ferris always trying to start some shit. Nigga can't fight, so he always trying to find some excuse to shoot somebody.
That's why fools be getting shot all the time. Trying to show how hard they is. Ignorant.
Oh, fool, shut up. You be doing that shit too.
So BOYZ N THE HOOD is probably one of the more personal stories a director has made. And it's interesting, too, because at such a young age, I think Singleton was like 18 when he started developing the idea for this as a requirement to get into film school at USC, and continued working on, developed the idea and then wrote the script while in college, and, was able to sell the movie to Columbia Pictures before he had graduated, which is kind of nuts.
It is, and I love to hear him talking about the writing process, like when he was coming up with this movie, because he knew what he wanted to do, and he saw what was around him, and like being a director, it seemed like for being a movie kid, it was like he finally realized that's what I'm meant to do, and he kind of lived by the idea of write what you know, and that's kind of where BOYZ N THE HOOD came from, and why it seemed to come really naturally to him, to a guy with a hell of a lot of writing talent. I think, like, above everything else, he was a really great writer. And hearing him talk about writing this in the computer lab at USC was really funny, because he said that writing the dialogue, he'd get, like, really amped about it and would, like, be saying some of this dialogue in the movie. And, it's pretty brash sometimes. I don't know. It's pretty funny. He's like, I tried to scare all the white people. I'm like one of the only black guys there. I gotta keep people in line. But just thinking about him like acting out some of the dialogue in a quiet library is pretty funny to me.
I think his writing is his strongest suit. This movie is, I think, not only kind of groundbreaking for having been one of the first, I think, movies that really showed like an edgy, dramatic side of life in South Central Los Angeles that was like a decent budgeted movie. I think the budget for 1990 when this was made was like around $6 million or something like that.
Yeah.
So not not a massive budget, but it wasn't an indie film by any means. It was like studio backed, and for a movie like that to hit the screen, certainly it was showing a side of America that many people hadn't seen, period, much less on the big screen. The writing of the movie, I think, the characters, the development, the story, just having an environment or a world that is unfamiliar to a lot of people, though interesting, doesn't make a good movie altogether, and I think like everything seems so real and edgy, but also comedic. A lot of educational messages throughout the movie that talk about gentrification or like how like systematic racism gets developed in neighborhoods and why neighborhoods that are in poverty continue to be taken advantage of from the wealthy. And now all that stuff is always talked about now. You see it in the news, there's books written on it, but pretty wild seeing a movie come out in 1991 by a 23-year-old director.
And the fact that a studio took a chance on him, that Columbia Pictures did. And I mean, he had a woman at Columbia that was, I think, what was she? She was a reader and then became an executive, I think, when BOYZ N the Hood went into production. He had people that read the script but helped push it along. Otherwise, this movie was not the easiest thing to sell to Columbia, to say, hey, make this movie by this 22-year-old kid, and we want a couple $1 million. And oh, by the way, you can try asking him to sell his script to you for like $150,000, but he's not. He's going to be like, well, that's too bad because I'm going to direct it. This is my movie. I'm directing it. You're going to do what I say. And he got away with it. It's nuts. And I think in a lot of ways, there's no way that a movie like BOYZ N the Hood could be made just today with all the factors. A 22-year-old, 4 months, I think, out of college. I think he thought about going to grad school and I think even applied, but then this got picked up. And so he kind of abandoned that idea. But the idea just that a studio took a chance on someone back when a filmmaker was, I mean, this was right as, the idea of an indie filmmaker, the indie movie was really starting to, I mean, it hadn't even become a thing yet, but this was a movie that certainly helped kickstart young directors, especially with a fresh voice, saying something that mainstream white America really, let's just say it, doesn't know anything about. And it was awesome. Just awesome when he did.
If you've ever seen in interviews with John Singleton, he's certainly not lacking in confidence. And I think that, you have to be a pretty confident person to, tell a studio when you're 22 years old to say, no, I'm directing this movie. He made the movie he wanted to make. He got the performance he wanted to make. And he said certainly there were times where things were rushed and they had to make concessions on, well, maybe we can't make this as big a scene as we want, but overall, set out to make the movie that he wanted to make. And I think that that's such a rare thing. Usually you always hear directors say, they made compromises and this movie was supposed to go this way and they weren't happy with it or weren't satisfied. But, he seems every bit happy with this movie, and everyone that works on it, has nothing but, amazing things to say about it.
And we'll probably get more into his directing, kind of how BOYZ N the Hood formed that a little bit later. But I have to say that the strongest thing about this film for me is the story and the casting choices that he wanted, that he chose for this movie. And Jackie Brown, who is the casting director, certainly facilitated this. But John Singleton certainly had ideas on who he wanted for I mean, hell, he wrote Doughboy for Ice Cube, and pretty much the same thing for Laurence Fishburne's character too. It's one of the biggest things in this movie, and what's so powerful about it is that everyone in it, no matter who you are, what your background is, if you know South Central Los Angeles or not, everyone is so relatable. The performances, you feel it. Everybody, it is just a story that I think anyone could feel, you know?
Like you said, the story and the characters to this are so rich. I mean, I think not only relatable, but like very
very developed.
Very developed, you know, and like Laurence Fishburne's character Furious, who plays the Cuba Gooding Jr.'s dad in this, I think anybody can relate to that as like a father who has had a child when he was really young, saw how in a neighborhood where there's not a lot of money, there's not a lot of opportunity, and a lot of people to deal with the hardships move to drugs or crime. And, you know, he talks about that in the movie. I think that that's part of his fiber of his character, and how you see an audience sees him try to not let his son fall through the cracks like he's seen so many people, and like really strive to potentially be hard on him. And I think any, you know, parents can look at this movie and say, you know, it's like there's always that conversation of like, am I too hard on my kids or am I too easy on my kids? It will affect how they develop. And I think we as, you know, growing up in our relationships with our parents, that's all on screen. You know, you can kind of see it's not very long, that 7-year period between, you know, being 11 or 12 to like 18. There a lot can happen, you know, the development stage there. And I think BOYZ N THE HOOD really shows that amongst all the characters. You know, the three friends that are growing up, we see the distinction on the decisions they make and the way their parents, what their relationship with their parents are, especially with like Doughboy and Ricky. They're brothers from two separate fathers. The mom favors Ricky, but she always lashes out at Doughboy, Ice Cube's character. And I think, again, that's another thing that's like very relatable and very, you know, it's not one dimensional. You know, there's scene after scene where we're building on that, and you see the difference in a relationship and how it's affected friendships. And that's something, you know, that's very true to life, you know, with friendships and in our relationships with family, and how that, you know, affects our character.
The other reason that this works so well is because Singleton was writing from personal experience, and like any movie where that happens with a director, especially writer-director too, when they're writing from experience, it's going to be so much more heartfelt, so much more earnest. Singleton's mom, you know, really did send him to live with his father, and his father was a very good role model and like whipped him into shape. And he was kind of a little unruly and really did kind of help form the responsible human being that he turned into, and really responsible and like had a vision and knew what he wanted to do. And even if he didn't feel confident about something, he knew that he had to project that idea of confidence. I mean, especially if he's supposed to be in a lot of ways the Cuba Gooding Jr. character in BOYZ N THE HOOD, Cuba is the one that sticks out amongst everybody. And John Singleton, like, he looked pretty nerdy. Like, you know, he wouldn't necessarily, like, he was on another level, you know? And I think that when you know a story's coming from a very personal place, that the guy that's writing it knew these characters in the movie, or he had friends of friends that were these characters in the movie, that there's no way that they can't be rich and developed.
When I also like, too, how Singleton in the script makes these distinctions between how people can kind of be torn as they get older, and like how they view things. Like Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character, Trey, has a friendship. He used to be good friends with Doughboy when he was younger, and then Doughboy kept going to jail. And he's still, you know, now he's better friends with Ricky, who, you know, is into sports and kind of working toward going to college. But Trey doesn't look down on Doughboy. You know, he doesn't seem to have this sort of arrogance, like I'm better than you because I'm, you know, staying out of trouble and I have this job and I'm not going to sell drugs. But we see that his dad, Furious, there's a scene where Doughboy's mom is talking to Trey when he's younger, and she's like, how come your dad doesn't come around here anymore? I hope he doesn't think he's better than we are. And you do see that Furious Laurence Fishburne's character has distanced himself from the neighbors, that he probably has like a different view on how to live life. And it almost seems like he does kind of look down on that a little bit, but his son kind of sees both sides of it. These are his friends, and he is protective of his friends, and he's loyal to his friends, even though, maybe he doesn't want to make the same decisions that Doughboy makes. That's not the path he wants to go on, but he doesn't, frown on Doughboy for selling drugs or like carrying a gun with him.
By the same token, Doughboy doesn't put down or shame Trey for, let's say, not wanting to drink or smoke weed. He doesn't make fun of him or anything like that. There's very much a mutual respect. And one aspect of this movie, probably like one of the biggest, is thinking about it as a choosing your life path. Two kids that grow up in the same neighborhood and have different home lives, both single parent lives, but they both choose vastly different paths in life. And I think that this is, yet again, a universal story where anyone can relate to it. Maybe you don't live in a neighborhood where there are gunshots and helicopters like flying over on the regular, but you can, knowing that this world actually does exist, you can imagine what these characters are going through. But you can just really imagine everything in it.
Kind of one last thing I want to say about the script too is that John Singleton had a lot to say. He had a lot to say about his neighborhood. I mean, even one of the last lines of the movie is Ice Cube saying, he watched the news. They were talking about all these killings that happened in other countries, but there was nothing on his brother who was gunned down in cold blood. And, he's basically saying the world outside of South Central they're not paying attention to what's going on, not just in South Central, but in black communities all across the United States. They're not paying attention to the problems that, that are riddled in communities and where violence is really high. And Singleton said, he was trying to walk a fine line with the script of not being heavy-handed and not being preachy. And I think that this movie does a really good job of like having a message without seeming preachy in any way. And there's a specific scene which I really like where Ricky and Trey go to visit Furious at his office, and he takes them to Compton, and having them look over some development that's happening, and it starts talking about gentrification and how there's no black-owned businesses in their neighborhood and how things need to stay black, they need to be black-owned. They weren't the ones that brought the drugs into their neighborhood, and really like lays a pretty heavy monologue onto these guys, and even people in the neighborhood are kind of watching. And when I was rewatching this movie, I that part came up in my head, and I was thinking like, is this going to come off cheesy now? Because it's like all of a sudden all these people are listening to him, kind of like preaching almost. But it really had an opposite effect to me. I was like, man, this is like so profound. Like nobody was talking about this, at least that I knew of.
And I know that scene can kind of like you said, look preachy, but to me, when I see that and see like the people from the neighborhood kind of like coming around in a lot of ways, I mean, when those neighborhoods, like everybody knows everybody's business, everybody's up in everybody's business, like we see that a lot with Doughboy. Like Doughboy owns his front porch, and what's going on across the street, what's going on 3 houses down, the crackhead 3 doors down is letting her kids run out in the middle of the street, and you always got to watch out for her kids. The same thing with the Laurence Fishburne gentrification scene is they're like, who's this guy coming to our neighborhood and what's he saying over here? No one's afraid, but they're like, who's this outsider? I love that scene. It is still so moving, and it was lost on me when I originally saw this, back in my teens. But seeing it now, it was just really, really moving. What a moving part. And we've kind of been throwing in a lot of the social commentary that John Singleton threw into this film. One thing that it only happens twice, or interactions with this person happen twice. It's a super common thing, and super common in reality, but to see in movies, a white cop being an asshole, to someone of color. What's interesting about this, though, is that Singleton looked at this as thinking, we all know the white cop is a jerk. We all know that. We assume that. But the deeper story is showing that also black cops can be jerks too, to people of their same race. And that is a whole other deeper level of self-hatred, and something too that doesn't really get a lot of exposure in movies. I mean, maybe now, sure, I guess, but it's still not something that we see a lot. And coming from an African American point of view about this particular neighborhood in LA, and that people were so targeted, especially African American males. I mean, hell, they still are today. But seeing that, having a black cop be so awful like he is in both the scenes in this movie, makes so much more of an impact. I think you don't even have to be black to see the impact of that.
I think this is a movie that's kind of looked at as like a pretty violent film, but it's really not, and I mean, though the movie, shows that at any moment, people have to be on their toes and like gunfire could break out. This isn't a movie where like people are getting shot like left and right throughout the whole film. I mean, there is and I think that's why the scene at the end is all much more powerful and dramatic, because you kind of feel safe with these characters. You grow to love them and like care about them. I think that's the other side that John Singleton's showing, is in neighborhoods where people don't have a lot, just territory and like respect is like what is more valuable than money, because nobody has the money, or they don't have a means to get out of that area. And so I think that's a side that other movies, I think after BOYZ N THE HOOD, kind of some of those movies focus more on like the crime aspect of this set of characters, and instead I think Singleton focused more on circumstance, which I think was like a really great move, and why this movie I think sort of outshines other movies that preceded it.
One reason that is I think it's harder to write a story with the heartfelt emotion, because you're dealing with like straight up feelings. I don't know how many times I thought, and this cast is maybe like 75% male, I think. But the amount of times that they talk about like actually open up to their friends, I was kind of surprised, just because I'm not really used to seeing that from male characters, unless it's like a bromance, comedy or something that like is kind of throwaway, but something that's actually having a dialogue about how you're feeling, what you're going through. And it's not just with Trey and his dad, it's like with Trey and his friends. It's Doughboy opening up. And that movie is so much harder to write than a movie that's just about straight up violence. And not that didn't exist, but this is the movie about people that were, for the most part, pretty innocent folks.
Yeah. Like
living in this world where this was just a regular part of life.
A really strong scene is when Cuba Gooding Jr. kind of breaks down after they get pulled over by the cop and harassed, goes to his girlfriend's house and kind of breaks down in tears. And that is a side that, like you said, you don't see in male characters, especially male characters always, trying to be macho with their friends. I remember that scene, like, I saw this movie maybe when I was like 14 and like thinking like, wow, that's, because especially when you're younger, it's like, guys aren't supposed to cry and all that bullshit, but it was specifically put in there to, again, kind of go against the grain of what we're used to seeing in movies.
And just maybe kind of to round us out of this discussion, one final thing about that scene. Nia Long, who plays Brandy, Trey's girlfriend, her reaction in that is not like, she doesn't know how to help her boyfriend other than to just hold him, as he's having this breakdown. And she said after that scene was over, Cuba said that scene was really difficult for him. And Nia Long said that after they were done, like, she had to like walk out of the set, and she had like a real breakdown herself, because it was such an honest moment, that people go through. And yeah, just a really moving scene. So many moving scenes in this film, and that's most certainly right up there.
Yeah. Well, let's stop there. We'll go to another clip from BOYZ N THE HOOD, but we'll come back. We'll talk about John Singleton and his other contributions to film, and then we'll talk about one of our favorite things to discuss, and that is the cast.
Yeah.
Be right back.
Yo, cuz. I know why you got the call last night. Shouldn't have been there in the first place. You don't want that shit to come back to haunt you. I ain't been up this early in a long time. Turned on the TV this morning. Had this shit on about living in a violent world. Showed all these foreign places foreigners living on. Started thinking, man. Either they don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's going on in the hood.
So I don't know that I could state enough how difficult it is just to make a movie, much less a really good one. And we've talked many, many times about, covered many episodes of directors' first movies. But setting the scene here, John Singleton, he's in film school. I don't know what the percentage is of people who go to film school and then have like really hugely successful careers where, people know the movies by name of director.
Extremely low.
Extremely low.
Yeah.
So picture John Singleton is 21. He's sold his script while in school to Columbia Pictures, and within less than 6 months of graduating from college, he's directing BOYZ N the Hood. The movie is just a huge success. It goes to the Cannes Film Festival, gets a 20-minute standing ovation. I think they thought this was going to be a much smaller movie. It was going to play to a broad audience, but it ended up really like making a lot of money, playing to a broad audience. And after the huge box office success of BOYZ N the Hood, John Singleton not only becomes the first African-American director to be nominated for Best Director, he also becomes the youngest at the age of 23. He was also nominated for Best Original Screenplay. Though he didn't win that year, just the nomination alone certainly got him a lot of press, a lot of buzz. And at the age of 24, his second feature, working with Janet Jackson and a young Tupac Shakur, it's the kind of career that it's almost unheard of, to be that young, that successful, that confident, even 2 years later, directing Higher Learning. After that, successfully making another movie in 1997, before the age of 30, having completed 4 features and finishing his 20s by directing Rosewood, which was another critically acclaimed film, though not as widely seen as some of his other movies. After the 90s, John Singleton, though he did like Baby Boy, which in 2001, which I think is another like pretty personal film of his, he did a handful of action movies. Like he redid Shaft, he did Four Brothers with Mark Wahlberg, he did the second Fast and the Furious movie, and then started producing some stuff, and then ended his directing career with feature films by doing the movie called Abduction, which was another sort of thriller action movie. So it's kind of interesting, starting out, in his 20s doing these like smaller personal films, and then the latter part of his career kind of being more known as like an action director.
And I think he, like a lot of directors, kind of went to where a lot of people are going now, which is TV, or at least television shows, and it's kind of the natural progression, and certainly not what it was in the 80s when he started. But upon revisiting or just watching some of these movies for the first time of his, I was really struck by Baby Boy, actually. I didn't particularly think I was going to be into the movie just based on the cover. It was like kind of just like super generic cover of Tyrese and Snoop Dogg, and I was like, okay, let's see what this movie's about. What a friggin' deep movie that is such an untold story that I've never seen a movie like it that's talking about what it's like to be a mama's boy. And I've just never seen that story told in depth, and that is what it's about. I also really enjoyed Shaft too. I didn't think, I have seen the original Shaft, of course, but pretty great revisit there of that movie.
Yeah, and it was definitely, he got more successful in his career and we're working with bigger budgets within the Hollywood system. He still, throughout his career, maintained, a dedication to putting black people in front of the camera and behind the camera, like trying to have predominantly black crews. And when he passed away, I think Ice Cube, said as a tribute to him that John Singleton loved bringing the black experience to the world. That was like something they truly loved, and it was out of sheer passion. And I think it's something that's like very evident with the movies that he left behind.
Like I said before, all of his films really have this honesty and heart to all of them. Everything that he'd done, and I think Cube's right on the money in saying that, and bringing the story to the masses that maybe you haven't heard before, which is one of the things that sets him apart.
And I think probably what I knew John Singleton most for outside of a director is producing and kind of using his own money to make the movie Hustle and Flow, which is a movie that I really love. And that was a movie that couldn't get made, and so he financed it himself and then took it to Sundance. And I think at the time it was like the highest sold film, in the festival's history. At that time, I think other movies have sold for more than that. But, using his success to help younger directors do their movies the way that they want, and I think that's always a great thing to see, directors who've been successful to kind of give back to the younger directors who are up and coming and help them make the movies that they want to make without having to be hindered by a studio system. And he was able to navigate that very well. I mean, I haven't really read too many interviews where he, said he had problems, and having to conform to get particular movies made. But it certainly seems like toward the latter part of his career, he was working on, kind of like big pictures like Fast and Furious, though it's kind of like a tentpole thing now. I mean, he was still working on like the sequel, which was a big franchise movie. So it's interesting to me, like someone who was such a personal director going to that. But he wanted to make big movies, even when he was young in interviews, and he said, "I want to make movies that everybody's going to see, like big movies like Steven Spielberg."
Well, one of the things he talked about, I saw in one interview, was saying that BOYZ N the Hood, like a movie like that, what he did, his whole experience with that, it just wouldn't happen nowadays. And that's because studios want more control over a movie that's coming out, and it's about the budget being bigger and badder, and it's not necessarily about the filmmaker. And it's not to say, his later films, he didn't have as much heart in them, but, he wasn't writing and directing these movies that he was directing. And I think he was, kind of playing the game, because that's kind of where things were moving towards. And it's also, I theorize anyway, why he was kind of drifting into television too, because it was just kind of where you have a little bit more creative control over things. And one thing too, if you go through his body of work, not only, like you said, Justin, giving filmmakers help along the way and making sure that they can get projects off the ground, but also, if you notice threads through his movies of using the same actors, you find somebody good, you want to stick with them. And he certainly was a reason for some careers blowing up. Like BOYZ N the Hood was the reason a lot of careers completely took off the ground. And putting his friends in movies, that's what he's kind of always done.
Yeah, and the cast to BOYZ N the Hood, what an incredible cast. Certainly, like, Cuba Gooding Jr. is the lead star in this movie, but this is really like kind of like it's a character study and an ensemble piece that you really feel like you get a part of, like, who his friends are and the characters that live in this neighborhood. Yeah, the casting to this movie is like just kind of mind-blowing. Like, so many people who started out in this are like Angela Bassett, who has gone on to do so many movies, and kind of seeing like Laurence Fishburne, who had really done like we said, like 10 years of movies, but this was giving him like a meaty role where he was kind of playing a character too that he hadn't really played in movies before.
And I think he was around 30 and wasn't I don't think he had really like settled into the idea of being the father figure, that sort of role, but he really ended up being the mentor. I mean, not only because he was the most experienced, but I think the character that he was playing, that John Singleton saw him as the whole time, as this father figure, as his father figure, really. He became that for everybody on set. Any actor this was their first movie, or they were just nervous about things, Laurence Fishburne was right there to help him through it.
And probably the most criminally underused actor, who is one of my favorite performances in Boys in the Hood, is Tyra Farrell, who really, I mean, she's been in a ton of stuff and you'd see her, but she always gets these like really small roles. But someone who can take a very tiny role and have like a lasting impression, which I think is, that's a true talent of an actor, is to kind of, even though you're playing the side role or the small character, leaving a lasting impression.
Just watching her from the character that she plays in Boys in the Hood to his next movie, Poetic Justice, watching her acting skills from going from two completely different characters is so cool. Like when I was watching all of these in succession and seeing that, I just kept laughing because it's such a drastic change and she does it so well. Yeah, Tyra Farrell, she was right on. I loved watching her.
Her scene in Boys in the Hood where they bring Ricky in, who's completely covered in blood. Everybody's emotional. He's already dead. And the sequence of her going from, what are you guys doing? She
enters the room?
Yeah, she enters the room. She doesn't know what's going on. She's kind of like, are you messing around? Why are you being so loud in here? To complete panic and grief-stricken, to hysteria, to anger. I mean, it's just like you could, how she wasn't nominated for supporting actor, and like, I mean, she really is the one in that scene that is like the gut punch.
When she starts to blame Doughboy as the reason that Ricky's dead because she can't deal with what's happening, it's just a moment of panic and grief and anger, and her son that you could say she loves him more than she loves Doughboy, or at least treats him better than she treats Doughboy. That scene is so hurtful, and just Doughboy putting his arms around her because he doesn't know how to deal with it. It's not like he storms off and is mad and it becomes about just straight up anger. It's not that. Like that scene is so, oh God, it hurts.
And she has moments where, like, when the football scout comes over to their house to interview Ricky, she puts on such this like sweet vibe for him. She's kind of like trying to really, make it as homey as possible, and then gives like a mean side eye to Doughboy and like, what are you doing? Like, get out of here. She's really able to like show, a multifaceted character, and she's so great in this. And she's had a really good career, but I feel like, again, like just criminally underused in movies. Like she should have, after Boys in the Hood, should have been in so many big movies.
And I think that she originally auditioned for Angela Bassett's character. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that she auditioned for Mrs. Stiles, Trey's mom, and was fairly disappointed that Singleton wanted her to play Ricky and Doughboy's mom. But I don't know. I mean, Angela Bassett, I could never get enough of that woman. I love her. And in this role, I think she actually has a little bit smaller of a role than I'd say than Tyra Farrell does. But both women are incredible, just truly incredible in this film. But Tyra Farrell certainly busts out every emotion that one could see on screen.
When John Singleton does a good job with giving everybody a really great scene to work with, like with Angela Bassett, the scene where she wants to have Trey come live with her after Laurence Fishburne's character has taken care of him for 7 years, and now, she's ready for him to come live with her, and they have the confrontation when they go, she has him meet her for lunch, and she kind of puts a smackdown on him and says, now let me talk, this isn't about him, just you have raised him like I'm still his mother. That scene is so great, and it says so much about her character. And you see, once she gets serious, like Laurence Fishburne kind of like shuts up and like listens to her. Yeah, it's a much smaller role, but when she comes back into the story, she comes back really strong.
I think we haven't really stated this in the story, but the reason that Trey goes to live with his dad is because Angela Bassett's character is wanting to make a better life for them, and so she's going to school, and she ideally, whenever Trey comes back to live with her, this is her idea that she's going to have a house and be set up and give him the best life possible. But at the time she is able to do that or have all of that ready for him, he's a man, he's been living with his dad the whole time. So it's not like it was a bad reason or anything like that why she sent him to live with his dad. I feel like that needed to be said. I don't think we said that before.
But yeah, they kind of talk about the main cast here, the three friends, Ricky, Trey, and Doughboy, portrayed by Cuba Gooding Jr., Ice Cube, and Morris Chestnut. Doughboy, portrayed by Ice Cube, it's kind of nuts to me to think that Ice Cube had to be kind of coerced into doing this movie. He didn't really know about doing the acting thing, and he's gone on to do so many movies, and I think like he doesn't have like a wide range of acting, but I think in this movie he gives probably one of the most honest and raw performances of anybody in the film. And it's like he is that character, and it's crazy to me to think that he had not acted at all or like even like kind of dabbled with it up until his performance in BOYZ N THE HOOD.
And I love the story about how he got involved with John Singleton, that Singleton had always wanted to have him in a movie and like kind of tried to convince him of that, and they ran into each other periodically like throughout the years, but he got him backstage at on the Arsenio Hall show because Singleton was a PA there, and he's like, one day I'm gonna write a movie for you, and he did the same thing actually to Laurence Fishburne, but it finally came off with that and pulled it off, and Ice Cube's manager said, there's a guy here that really wants you to audition for this part. And he shows up and he's like, hey, it's you. You're the guy that was harassing me like 3 years ago about this. But it turns out the audition, Cube's audition, was awful. And it was awful because he hadn't taken the time to actually read the script, which sounds like something Ice Cube would do. That he could just walk in and like immediately own it, because he can walk in and immediately own anything, really. But he didn't own that audition, and he read the script, and as soon as he came back and did it again for John Singleton, he nailed it. And he really does, man. I just want to give him the biggest hug, even though he'd push me away in this movie. I love Doughboy. I think he's my favorite in this movie.
Yeah, same for me. Well, moving on to Trey, portrayed by Cuba Gooding Jr., who is the star of the movie. He's like the central character, the character that we're following throughout the film. He'd only really done like a few kind of like little bit roles, and I think really is the middle ground of characters for this movie. I believe that all these things that Laurence Fishburne's Furious's character has taught him have been ingrained, and I think that they like show in his eyes and his movements and the way he interacts with his friends. He's the character I think that probably most people can relate to. You're a little reserved, but you're also, and a little cautious, but you also are honest and will back your friends if you need to.
All of that, yeah. And also he's not reactionary. He's one of the, and I guess like Ricky isn't really too reactionary either, but Trey's taking the time to meditate on something before he does something, which is, I think, what we don't see a lot of in his friends. And what sets him apart. And Cuba's performance, he's got numerous times where he really shows off how he was just born to play this role and how his career blew up afterwards.
Yeah, and Cuba Gooding Jr. had like a really big, career post this movie. I mean, he really didn't get typecast. He's done like a variety of roles, and then really only like, was it like 4 years later won the Oscar, Best Supporting Oscar for his role in Jerry Maguire.
Yeah. He's been in a lot of movies that I like a lot. Yeah, I'm never mad about seeing him in a movie. If anything, I would be like, oh, I bet this is going to be a good movie because Cuba Gooding Jr.'s in it.
Well, and if you've watched the series, The People versus O.J. Simpson, when I first saw the advertisement for that, the trailer, when they said Cuba Gooding Jr. plays OJ, I just couldn't picture it. I mean, Cuba Gooding Jr. is just seems like smaller in stature, kind of a weird casting decision. But then I've watched that whole series twice now, and it's like, man, you forget that it's Cuba Gooding Jr. almost immediately.
It's weird because it really looks like he embodies everything, just OJ's dejected face the whole time that all of that was going on. He really just embodied it. I don't know how he did it, but yeah, I've also watched that series and I was really captivated by the entire thing.
And Morris Chestnut, who has also had a pretty big career, has been in so many movies. I think for this, he does play kind of the jock, but also is a really endearing character. And Ricky has to be a character that you care about, because when he dies, if you don't care about his character, that scene is not going to be as powerful. And I think he does, and he's not in the movie as much as I think Doughboy or Cuba, but in what John Singleton said, he wrote him as a knucklehead, this sort of goofball. And I feel like he's that character that we all can identify as, the easygoing guy who's got one particular sheer talent, but is easygoing and kind of gets along with everybody and is kind of a dreamer, looks at the positive side of things, oh, wouldn't it be great if this could happen, or wouldn't it be great, doesn't, and is surrounded by so much depression and adversity, but finds a little bit of happiness and positivity amongst everything, and also is kind of a mama's boy, the opposite of his brother.
And the scene where he goes down, where he gets shot, that one, Singleton does a real good, and I mean, you could probably guess that it would be done kind of slowed down in slow motion. But man, is that not, you see the carefree feeling that Ricky has just kind of disappear from him. Once they realize that they're being chased by these guys and that there's maybe a risk that something's going to happen, you really see the immediate change in him. And Ricky might be a carefree guy, but he still knows the environment that he's living around, and he knows that he needs to, the only option he has is to just run, and unfortunately did not work out for him.
And worked with Singleton again. When I was watching Higher Learning, a blink and you miss him moment in Higher Learning.
That's true.
As one of the members of the track team.
Yep.
But has gone on to have a big career, and recently was in the Girls Trip, which was a huge hit.
Oh yeah, that's right, he was, wasn't he? Let's see. Just kind of to round it out, the two other female roles are really important to this movie. One is Nia Long, who plays Brandy, Trey's girlfriend. She does a great job in anything that she's in, generally, playing the sweet, smart, just all-round girl that you want to be your friend because she's a good person, and that's who she plays in this movie, and she's really great at it. And she's kind of Trey's rock in a lot of ways, in the ways that his father is for him. She fills in the gap and also keeps him in line and isn't afraid of standing up for herself and saying what she needs. And she is very commanding and does such a good job. And I think at her audition, John Singleton kind of singled her out in the long line of folks that were outside waiting to go into the audition, and no one knew what John Singleton looked like, and so he comes up to her and he's like, "Hey, tell me a little bit about you." And she was like, "Excuse me, who are you?" And gave him some attitude back, and he was really trying to get get a little bit out of her, just naturally who she was. And so she goes into the audition and he's there and she's like, "Oh my God, I just blew that," because I totally blew him off outside. But that's actually one of the reasons she got the part.
Man, she's been in so much stuff. I love that both her, so many people from this were in Friday Together. But
Yeah.
she's also in kind of one of my favorite like romantic type movies, and that's Love Jones.
Oh, yeah.
That's one I can never get enough of.
Oh, yeah. I mean, she's extremely talented. You can just looking at her, you feel this integrity about her too. Yeah, she's definitely strong lead. And not to be outdone, I gotta say, I love when Regina King is in anything. And I watched her in 227 growing up. I mean, I remember very little because I watched that like when I was growing up, but I remember her character. And yeah, this was like the next thing that she got after 227. She said that she wasn't able, after that show ended, she really wasn't even able to get an audition, which is crazy to me after being on a show for like 5 years that would happen. But it was also the state of Hollywood for black actors. But she got Boys in the Hood, and I don't know. How do you feel about Regina King, Justin? I love her.
I love Regina King. I mean, she's been in so many movies that were like hits or like cult hits. I love that she's that she plays Cuba Gooding Jr.'s wife and Jerry Maguire. Even though I don't really like that movie that very much, but
Sure.
yeah, I think she always brings like a little comedic edge to like a lot of her performances.
She there's a little revisit in Higher Learning I noticed between she and Ice Cube that because they're in Boys in the Hood, they've got like a little bit of, I don't want to say animosity, but a little bit of like poking each other a little bit. And there's a scene like that in Higher Learning too, and you know that John Singleton's cracking up over the fact that he did that. It's totally revisiting Boys in the Hood.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason why John Singleton used Regina King for, his first 3 movies. She had like pretty substantial roles, or each role got a little bit bigger as his movies progressed. And, and she's like, I think had like a real huge, like steady career where she was getting bigger roles. And then most recently won Best Actress for If Beale Street Could Talk. So I'm curious to see like, what she will be in next if they're ever able to start making movies again after the pandemic is kind of like calmed down.
Oh, this pandemic, I tell you. Let's see. I mean, there's so many people to talk about in this. And like we said before, John Singleton always brings back actors like V-Dub, who you might remember from Boys in the Hood as the guy with the pacifier, who I learned the reason he had the pacifier was because he was trying to stop smoking. So John Singleton just liked that look, and so he had him keep that for the character. I know that actor did pass away, but John Singleton forever immortalized him on screen.
Again, such a great cast for this movie, but let's stop there. We'll come back for some final thoughts on Boys in the Hood, but let's get into our picks of the week. Again, Lindsay, you went for Higher Learning, John Singleton's 3rd movie. What can you tell me about Higher Learning?
Well, Higher Learning was my introduction, really, to John Singleton when I first realized whose movies I had been watching and really took note of it. Fairly certain he was writing this movie while he was still an undergrad, and it feels like a 2-hour multicultural class. He successfully weaves together almost every type of oppression into a fictional college campus, a university named after a celebrated oppressor, which is no coincidence. Singleton broadens his scope of subject matter, this time hitting on a checklist of rough topics like racism, classism, rape, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and even school shootings. This is all a heightened sense of reality and is very in your face. The film focuses on 3 main characters, though the entire cast is important too. Malik, played by Omar Epps, is an incoming freshman with a little chip on his shoulder. He's been getting by, but not putting the work in. Laurence Fishburne plays Phipps, the political science professor with whom Malik expects special treatment because they're both black. Phipps seeks to challenge Malik's apathy and feed his brain instead of letting him skate by. Pushed into doing better for himself, he's got to stop relying on thinking that the world owes him, because it just ain't gonna happen. Epps' character growth is certainly prominent and is also partnered up with a girl Malik briefly encounters in an elevator. No words are exchanged, but the girl clutches her purse tighter when Malik is standing next to her, a moment that's soon forgotten as soon as it happened by her, but Malik recognizes this as a subtle racist move. Meet Kristen, played by Christy Swanson. She's a basic Orange County white girl, naive, ready to be imprinted on, or just blissfully unaware. Luckily for her, she meets up with a seemingly lesbian person from the Students from a Non-Sexist Society, hoping to enlighten her in the most respectful of ways, but unfortunately not before a traumatic experience forever alters Kristen's worldview. Lastly, we've got Remy, played by Michael Rapaport. He really brings together all these tensions in the movie and is the catalyst for the climax. He's a lost white guy, doesn't have direction, socially awkward, and just waiting for any crowd to accept him. Like true predators, a group of white supremacist students give him a purpose. He doesn't have any self-esteem, which Singleton shows can create a very dangerous person. They're all malleable personalities, seeking knowledge. These three people set in motion events which revolve around the all-too-common social issues, but set in this microcosm of a world, a college campus. My favorite characters might be some of the supporting roles. Tyra Banks is so awesome playing Malik's girlfriend. She brings the most amount of brain to the film next to Fishburne. Ice Cube comes back for this movie too. His wisdom as the 6-year college student is perfect for him. He and Tyra are kind of the enlightened ones, but the way in which they look at life is totally contrasting. Regina King, of course. Already said I love her. Rounds out my faves. She plays Monet, Kristen's roommate, and recognizes that Kristen is extremely naive, but doesn't put her white roommate in a box just based on race. She does have this great line that she says to Kristen that's always stuck with me. Just because you and I get along doesn't mean everybody has to. You need to get this we are the world stuff out of your head because it's just not going to happen. Right there, that tells you everything about higher learning. Busta Rhymes also makes a appearance in this movie as Ice Cube's right-hand man, and Cole Hauser, man, this guy just made a career out of being a bigot in movies, like all over me. But he really turns in a chilling performance as like the main Nazi boy on campus. And like I said before, this movie really does hit on every type of topic, hot button issue topic. And one is the idea of bisexuality, which was hardly ever brought up in movies at the time and kind of today still remains a muted subject. Now, Singleton's hetero maleness does come through with this subject, but it's visibility that matters. And like everything in higher learning, this movie is about creating a dialogue. A lot of time is spent showing different groups of people being brought together by circumstances, even amongst the self-segregation that a lot of groups do just based on their race. Like a true visual storyteller, he shows us that we're all the same emotions, same feelings of victimization, but how we choose to move forward, there's the difference. And he guides us through this movie with various kind of filming techniques, and you really start to notice how he's evolved since BOYZ N the Hood. Like creative transitions and blocking, he did a lot of that in BOYZ N the Hood, and we kind of see how he's gotten even more creative with that. There's a couple scenes in Higher Learning which I really admire his even attempting the scene that he even attempted transitions that he did. They're pretty cool. And I'd be remiss to not mention the very soulful, funk-heavy, atmospheric soundtrack. Music is super important to John Singleton, and every song in this movie has an intentional purpose. Like Malik, Kristen, and Remy, they're introduced by when we see them setting up their dorms, but it's over the music that they're listening to, in their dorm room. So we immediately get the idea of who they are based on their music and make a judgment based on that. There's also a really gut-wrenching scene where Singleton chose a Tori Amos song that's over a rape scene. And if you know Tori Amos's history with that, it was just a very thoughtful choice. It really amps up the impact of that scene. So Higher Learning does cram in a lot, as much as possible. We look at this movie, 25 years later and realize that nothing has changed, which is pretty sad. But in some ways it's kind of interesting, to like look back and see where we were 25 years ago and look back and see, has it gotten better? Has it actually gotten worse? I can't even tell nowadays. As we've mentioned about John Singleton's films, this movie is full of heart and meant to make you think and reevaluate. Just as it opened, Higher Learning closes on an American flag, but this time Singleton leaves us with one word typed out on screen: unlearn. He also chose to have Swanson positioned right in front of the flag as she's speaking at a rally, publicly admitting that she'd been raped. This is America. This happens. This is us. Victimization is everywhere, reminding us that we are the product of what's around us and what we come from, whatever happens to us. We're all processing this together. And the only way to make peace, to create change, is to bridge the gap, reconnect, and unlearn. I'm kind of happy in some ways that this was my first John Singleton movie, or first movie that I watched and realized, who the director was and made note of it, and then was like, oh, I've seen his movies before. Yeah, if you get a chance, watch Higher Learning. Like I said, it is a heightened version of reality, and there's a lot crammed into it, but it's a good revisit.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the revisit of this movie. There is a lot going on. There's a lot. Crammed is a very good word. There's so much happening, but the movie's like riveting and entertaining, but yeah, it's like has a powerful message that I think really you could watch that movie today. And I find like a lot of these John Singleton movies I'm watching now and thinking like, they're as relevant today as they were when they came out.
Yeah. And, BOYZ N the Hood, the characters are much more developed and rich, and there's just not enough time in Higher Learning. There's a lot more characters involved and a lot more plots happening, but it doesn't mean that it's any less effective, Like I said before, I feel like a lot of his movies just need to be taught in high school.
Yeah.
All right. I cannot wait to hear about this Laurence Fishburne movie. Tell us about it.
So, like I said, Deep Cover was Laurence Fishburne's first, one of his first movies where he's like the lead marquee actor. This movie was directed by actor turned director Bill Duke, who I love so much in Commando and Predator. This is it's kind of like a genre blending movie. It's kind of film noir, crime, character driven drama. So Fishburne plays an police officer who decides to get into undercover work. When he was younger, we see in the beginning of the movie, he sees his father start a life of crime and is gunned down in front of him as an 8-year-old kid. And then we cut 20 years later to him working in the police force and gets hired onto a special assignment as an undercover cop trying to bring down a huge drug lord. This seems like a plot that we've seen many times before, and certainly is. But this movie, I think, makes up for a plot that we've seen many, many times before with script and style, and certainly with Laurence Fishburne's performance. As he goes deeper undercover, he needs to start selling drugs, and he realizes that he's better at being a drug dealer and manipulating people than he was as a police officer. There's some great characters in this movie. This movie's rich with characters. It's kind of like why I wanted to pick it along with BOYZ N the Hood, because it's another movie where even though people have a very small screen time, they make the most with it. Everybody is memorable. Namely, Jeff Goldblum plays a character in this that it's a little bit different side than you've seen Jeff Goldblum do in movies before. And one of his performances I don't really think is too talked about. So it's worth it just for that if you're a fan of Jeff Goldblum and you haven't seen this movie. I don't really want to give away too much of the plot, because if this is one that you haven't seen, I highly recommend it, because it does have a lot of twists and turns. Great music. I love a movie where the theme song is the same name of the movie and thematically has ties to the plot of the movie. And the theme song, Deep Cover, was done by Dr. Dre with an early performance collaboration with Snoop Dogg before he put out his first big solo album. This is a movie that's like really gritty, some really great stylistic choices by director Bill Duke, who I think was trying to make a gritty movie that was like along the lines of New Jack City, but this one I think is almost trying to make the characters like cooler, and I think it kind of shows a little bit about the dealer life, and Laurence Fishburne's character like kind of gets sucked into the world of like making a lot of money and having power and having connections, and in the movie deals a lot with the moral compass of his character. Yeah, it's highly entertaining. It's a really tight script. The movie's I think maybe like clocks in at like an hour and 45 minutes. If you like crime dramas and you're a fan of Jeff Goldblum and Laurence Fishburne, this movie's kind of like a slam dunk for a watch or a rewatch.
Is this streaming somewhere, or do you have it?
I couldn't find it streaming anywhere. I actually had the DVD, but I think you can get it on Prime for, I mean, most like YouTube and places, you can still find it for rent streaming for like $3.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, $3, come on. Yeah, I feel this seems right up my alley. I'm glad you told us about this one.
Yeah. Well, those are our picks of the week. Higher Learning and Deep Cover, 2 movies definitely worth checking out or revisiting if you haven't seen them in a while or haven't seen them at all. But let's keep going. Here's your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even show.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shut?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
One thing that's persisted in Billy Murray's life is his unpredictability. From when he was a kid battling for attention with his 8 siblings at the dinner table to legendary tales and this Murray moment. In no way am I promoting violence or confrontations or ever a way to solve a problem in life. I was crossing the street with my dogs the other day and this car blows through the stoplight and almost hit us. After being absorbed by, watching BOYZ N THE HOOD a lot recently, I couldn't help but mutter some choice words under my breath towards the car that almost hit me. But what I wanted to do was bash in the headlights. And this kind of like violent reaction within me, at this moment, I remembered a very fitting Murray moment for this episode. And that being the time that Billy had enough of someone giving him grief, so he decided to put an immediate stop to it. Picture this. Toronto, Canada, 1974. Second City, Chicago, and Toronto troops decided to switch casts, and Bill finds himself on a new stage with a Canadian audience. I wasn't there that night, said Second City player Joe Flaherty. There was someone drunk in the audience that just kept heckling him. He told him to shut up, and he just wouldn't shut up. Though she was also not there, another Second City player, Robin McCullough, said that the guy had just been tormenting Billy all night. Finally, during the suggestion-taking for the improv set, Bill lost it, she said. He screams, "Fuck you and your date, too." He's not shy about throwing his fists around, Second City player Dave Thomas once said about those early days of Billy. Everyone's account of the story varies. It was a long time ago. Another Second City cast member, Sheldon Patinkin, said he heard about the story as soon as he arrived in Toronto. Bill's the only one I know who actually jumped out into the audience, grabbed a guy, pulled him out into the alley, and beat the living shit out of him, he said. Now, for Mert Rich, who'd been sharing the stage with Billy at the time, there's no confusing what happened here. We had a heckler in the audience all night, Rich said. All of a sudden, Murray says, "Ladies and gentlemen, there's someone who's been interrupting the show all night, and they won't do it any longer." As Billy abandons the stage, he jumps into the audience and drags this drunk heckler out into the alley and lets him have it. Multiple sources claim that Billy reinvented the way the guy's arm bent, but Rich doesn't recall any actual breaking of bones. The guy didn't sue, or maybe even remember that it had even happened, because Rich said that the guy comes back. He came back in and he wanders backstage. He's so out of it and now claiming that he lost his wallet, not even registering that he's staring straight at Billy, who just whooped his butt straight against a fire exit door in an alley. Bill taught me a valuable lesson in audience management that night, Rich said. I think we all, deep in our hearts, had a time when we had the same thought cross our minds, McCullough said. Bill just stood in for all of us. Now, this is just one of many stories which contribute to why old friends of Billy's have referred to him as the Murricane, an unpredictable force of nature. You don't mess with a person's crew, mama, or show disrespect, and you won't get the wrath, whether you're, Doughboy in Boys in the Hood or you're the Hurricane. Being a self-admitted, quote, loner, brawler, and joint smoker, Billy's always worked within his parameters. His predictable unpredictability is something one can always bank on. And there's a few other stories out there, like this, but hey, that's another Murray moment.
The darker side of Murray.
I love how there's only one person that says that he didn't break the guy's arm, but everyone else is like, he totally broke that guy's arm.
That's messed up.
It's pretty funny. I don't think he did. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
It was 1974.
The violent years.
Yeah, the violent years.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that Murray moment. I wasn't expecting that one.
These things just happen. They just find themselves,
I was like thinking in my head, like, was Bill Murray and Ice Cube in a movie together? I couldn't picture it.
No, they haven't. There's a Laurence Fishburne Bill Murray thing, but I decided not to go for that one. It was, maybe another time. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that Murray moment.
Oh, of course.
Did you have any final thoughts on Boys in the Hood before we wrap things up for the episode?
Let's see. A little fun fact is the scene in Boys in the Hood where Trey and Ricky are meeting up with Regina King and Ice Cube, and it's like kind of like where there's a lot of people in cars. There's like 100 extras, something like that, and then they meet up with somebody mouths off, and Cube steps up to him and shows him that he's got a piece on him, and then the other guy shoots off a gun. Everybody runs and scatters. Well, that whole scene, when you watch that, nobody knew that guy was going to fire a gun. And so the reaction of everyone in that scene is legit. Because I think everyone was already kind of a little on edge. There had been a threat from a gang because of just where they were, and, you're in their territory. So people were a little on edge that maybe a drive-by or something could happen while they're filming. So this, gun goes off, and that reaction that you see in the movie, I'm fairly certain was the first take that they did of that. So super extreme reaction from everybody, and it's a really good scene.
Almost kind of like the borrowing from what Rob Reiner did in Stand By Me to scare the kids into a terrified performance. Yeah,
totally. When in doubt, just don't tell them what's going to happen and get that legit reaction.
Make it real. I guess my only final thought on the movie is I always love it when movies do this where they have, an original score mixed in with contemporary music, especially for a movie like this that was so hip to the times. And this had a really big soundtrack that spawned 2 singles. The soundtrack was, I think, like almost as successful as the movie, but then it also had Stanley Clarke do like a jazz-inspired score. He's gone on, he's composed so many movies, but he worked with John Singleton doing the score for Poetic Justice and Higher Learning as well. But I think it really is a nice transition, this movie, to go from score into the hip hop R&B soundtrack that flows throughout the movie. It really, to me, is like a nice dichotomy.
Oh yeah, for sure. The music in this movie is John Singleton really is able to find the most real way to get across the realness in a scene, and then also music that's going to pull some serious emotion out of you. Yeah, I really did notice that, how it was very different in some scenes. Obviously, like some real jams that were being laid down. That's probably sounds really dumb, but some like good music that's being laid down.
Yeah, and I feel like dramatic scenes, the score always helps a dramatic scene. I mean, it can hurt it too by making it, kind of like over, trying to like manipulate your feelings. But I think in this movie, like this, the dramatic scenes like really called for a score.
Yeah, there's no manipulation here because you're already feeling it. This is just like just making you feel it even deeper on a level that it's you can't even control type of thing.
Well, we'll stop there. Hope you've enjoyed our talk on BOYZ N THE HOOD, and once again, RIP to John Singleton. I feel bad that it's taken us this long to do somewhat of a tribute episode, but better late than never.
Yeah, very true. I'm so proud of what this guy has brought to the movie world, and man, we lost an incredible voice for the world, and it is a gosh darn shame. But I'm very thankful for the body of work that he's left behind.
I agree. Well, what do we got coming up next? Oh, I know what we have coming up next. Our next episode, we're going with another old classic, the 30th anniversary of Total Recall.
Crazy. That's one we've talked about too, and it's taken us a little while to get to it.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to that one.
So that's coming up next. If you haven't, please follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. We seem to be most active on Instagram, but you can always see, what we're watching, what movies are coming up, what we're talking about. If you'd like to listen to any of our old episodes, they're on most platforms, but our archive is on our website at don'tpushpausepodcast.com. And there you also find, we have a store there where we have Don't Push Pause Podcast merch, as well as posters, these little VHS box things that we make, all kinds of goodies, some of them random, some of them not, but they're all for sale, and all that money goes to helping us produce a bigger and better podcast. If you want to reach us directly for any reason whatsoever, you can always contact us at don'tpushpausepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reaper.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, guys.